It seems that not everything in life can be explained. Science can answer almost everything, but it seems like a mystery. The mind still confuses us and leaves us scratching our heads. Me and my friend, we shouldn't be here, will share the four scariest things mystical stories. Here are a few details I think you should know. I am a pretty tall and well-built female, so not much scares me. I was 18 at the time this happened, and just a memory of this thing still gives me panic attacks. I was working as a seasonal maintenance worker at one of the parks in the Cherokee National Forest. Often, I would get to work before the rangers and other workers so that I could take care of the rescue animals. I arrived to work while it was still pitch black outside. I had to open the gate before entering the area where the maintenance building and the animal cages were. I went inside to start my morning routine and prepare the animals' food. I didn't bother to turn on the light, since plenty filtered in through the two full-length windows that faced towards the road and the others towards the cages, so there was plenty of light to see by. As I started getting the food ready, I began to get this sense of creepy unease. I took a look outside for whatever was making me feel this way. All I could see was a little old woman with tan skin stumbling drunkenly down the road under the streetlight. People walking these roads weren't that unusual because there is a camping site down the road. Something was off. This little old lady, man, or whatever it was, didn't seem quite right. Somehow, my unease kept growing as they came closer. Just as precaution, I locked the front door, which is solid steel, to keep people from stealing equipment. The front gate was open, and the man stumbled through. Keeping the lights off, I ran to the back to make sure the door was locked as well. I sprinted back when I heard the fox and owls making the most distressing sounds I'd ever heard. I could see some frantically trying to get out of their cages while others hid. I thought it might be the old man at first, but what I saw crouching between the cages was something completely different. My unease had now turned into full-blown primal fear. Suddenly, everything went completely silent. Then a voice that sounded like my boss, but not quite like him, more like someone trying to mimic the way he talked, called out, but I couldn't understand it. The thing began to come forward in a sort of lurch. Its eyes flinched open, and they were sickly green color. It seemed to glow like animals' eyes do when you shine a light on them in the dark. Then it dropped off fours and started crawling like some demonic creature from a horror movie toward me. It had shaggy, matted fur and a canine-like appearance. But like if you had mixed it with a human and then hit it with the car, 'cause it was just all so wrong. With a burst of speed, it stood up and slammed into the glass. Its breath fogged up the glass, and it must have stood a good 4 inches from my 5'9" frame. It wasn't huge, but at the time, it looked massive. I was frozen like a deer in the headlights, just staring at this thing. It unhinged its jaw, letting it hang loosely, and the strange voice that sounded a lot like my boss began pleading. "Maggie, open the door. I need your help." I backed up, feeling for the wrench that was just on the workbench. I was not going to take my eyes off this thing. In all my years of exploring these mountains, I have never seen anything like this creature. And no, I didn't think the wrench was going to do much against this thing. But what else was I supposed to do? It started, frantically saying, "Let me in. Help me." Each time the voice would change. Sometimes it would be my coworker. Other times it would be my family's voices. All I could think was that thing that I just don't know what I could think. I just didn't want this thing to come in here and kill me. I'm not a religious person, of the time I prayed for anyone to help me. I realized there was this foul stench of rotting meat in the air, and I had to fight, not to retch. The creature paced back and forth, clicking its teeth together as it looked frustrated. Without warning, it rounded the corner, started violently yanking at the door and shrieking, "Let me in! Let me in!" It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I was numb at this point, and all ready to fight for my life. As quickly as it started, it stopped, and the horrible smell began to disappear. I looked out the window in time to see this thing scale the fence and cross the road, disappearing into the forest. Seconds later, my boss came to the little door. I almost collapsed in relief. Taking the wrench from me and sitting me down, I told him what had happened. I thought he wouldn't believe me, but his wrinkled face just grew stern and concerned, and in a voice that was not to be questioned, he told me to never talk about this creature or it will draw his attention. To never speak of it, and lastly, to never invite it in. If I followed these rules, then I should be fine. He's not sure what drew the creature's attention that morning, but for the rest of my time working there, nothing like this happened again. Sometimes, when I'm on the back trails, I can hear voices or smell that overwhelming stench of death. But until I never see this thing again. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and share this on your social media to help the swamps continue to grow. Also, join me on Twitter and Facebook. I post exclusive videos and updates over there for you guys all the time. If you have a story you'd like to share in the channel, be sure to send it in to the email that you can find in the description down below. These stories were definitely creepy, and much love to my friend We Shouldn't Be Here for helping me read them. I do appreciate you guys sending them in and allowing us to share them with the world.
About 12 years ago, I used to live in a dome house. It's one of the only two in our town, and the other is a church. So it's very unique, not just in the architecture, but also in the story of its history. Behind the house I lived in was yet another, bigger dome, one we lived in the apartment contained within. We, meaning my best friend, who was also female like myself, and then her husband. My friend's husband informed me that when they were building the domes, a construction worker fell from the ceiling of the dome, which was around 3 stories up, to the concrete floor below. He obviously didn't survive. Fast forward 20 or so years, and we were living in the apartment just below the area where said workman fell. The feeling of that apartment was always as though someone was watching at all times. Nothing strange happened until we moved into the main house after the larger dome was demolished because of black mold. We moved in and the feeling of being watched continued, but eventually we got used to the feeling, except when it was so strong that it was unavoidable. Now there were many incidents of unexplainable things happening, like my friend getting out of the bath upstairs and feeling like a child wrapped his arms around her neck. Like my friend getting out of the bath upstairs and feeling a child wrap his arms around her naked waist and saying "mama," or having my tarot cards just materialize from my bedroom upstairs to in front of the back door downstairs, or seeing a cowboy guy standing in the hallway that just disappeared. Also, every night just before falling asleep in one particular room, I would hear the loud bangs on the wall above my bed that would wake me right up. The most disturbing happening was one night I had gone to sleep in my bed upstairs. Now our stairs were spiral that went up to a landing, and all around the landing were bedroom doors, a door to the aforementioned bathroom and the balcony. This particular night my best friend went to sleep on the couch beneath the balcony. Her husband had been activated in the army and was in Texas before deployment. I was passed out, and I said, in my bed, maybe a little after midnight, I wake up to her screaming my name, I leapt out of the bed, still in fog of sleepiness. I stopped at the balcony to see what had happened. "Were you just throwing coins at me?" she yells accusingly up at me. "What?" I said. "No, I was passed out." "That's not funny, Sam. Just tell me it was you." Her voice quivered with fear. "No, I told you I was asleep," I said. This made her choke up. I went downstairs immediately. She told me that she was trying to sleep on the couch. Suddenly, we heard something metallic hit the wood floor next to the couch she was laying on. A minute or so later, another bounced off of the couch and fell onto the wood floor. Then, a coin landed on her. She jumped up and started screaming my name. The proof was on the floor. I saw it with my own eyes. Several pennies peppered the living room floor. After that, we went to bed downstairs in her bedroom. After I moved out months later, I never forgot that house. Many little things happened in the house, but nothing compared to that experience. It never happened again, and I'm glad that it didn't. I'm 27 years old, male, live in the UK with my fiancé, and currently working as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special educational needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013 when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teens and young adults, 18 to 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a game room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house and activity room that led on to acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all of the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all of my jobs done for around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he did have a lot of strength behind him when he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing could set him off. He once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words, put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go outside and play. He was generally well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself. And he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on top of the step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so to make sure he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled in, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James' bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofas, books, stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, his eyes looked almost half shut, like he had been asleep. I asked if he was okay and he said yes and put his thumbs up. This was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over. An hour or so passed by. Now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare empty room. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night, so if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry around makes a noise and a light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened, numbered 1 through 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when asked what was wrong. This was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat this phrase. Once James had settled into bed, the night staff left, and the other member of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks, and as usual finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all of the residents, but as I got onto the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand sides of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there, in the darkness, in complete silence, was James. He was stood in the corner, completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3", and weigh about 220, but at that moment I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked what was going on, and for a while he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off, and I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James talking about the little girl had gotten a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out of the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard the phrase. That night around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now this instantly seemed a little bit weird to me, as because it was being used for storage at the time. I went out to investigate and found James stood in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me enter and was just standing there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's go back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with the key to the front door were myself and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key and 2 that require electronic ID cards. It was now 3:25 a.m. and the manager never came in before 8, so I presumed that there must have been some kind of mistake and continued to defuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked on each side of the residence to make sure they were still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guess that he must have just been dreaming, as his window was on the 3rd floor and the house was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure him and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that had prevented it from opening wide enough for someone to fit through was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank down into his bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there and left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and around -2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secured drawer where all of the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed to access the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing. So I woke the sleep-in staff, told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found this missing knife, so decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part? In the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and a missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-styled baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 50s, from the style of clothes and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and the bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic boy, and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and the bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows? But now I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon.
About a year ago, my husband and I were in our bedroom having a discussion. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I know I had to do with spirituality, identifying the type of being and its energy, their intent, and how it makes you feel at the very moment. My husband was standing at the sink in our bathroom, and I was standing in the bathroom doorway to his left, with the left side facing a room. Somehow, and I do not recall how, I started talking about possessions, demons, and their names, and for some reason, I googled a list of demon names. I started at the top of the list and began trying to pronounce the name. Luckily, I suck at pronunciation. Even now, it's kind of difficult. As I've tried a few times to say this name, the more successful I became is when I started to all of a sudden feel an intense energy that consumed the left side of my body, the side that was facing our room. It was as if someone or something ran or flew high speed right up to me, almost in my face. I felt threatened, as if it were daring me, as if it were saying, Say it, bitch. My left arm felt as if someone was not necessarily grabbing it in one spot, but was so close that my whole arm felt tight and tingly and slightly numb. I abruptly stopped trying to say his name and said, "Oh my God," then was silent and literally terrified. I was so scared that I went into the bedroom with my husband while he was still at the sink, sat on the toilet in fear, and kept peeking around my husband, looking into our room for a good minute with what he described as a look of pure fear and concern on my face. This whole time, the tingling, yet almost electrical numbness did not subside. Once that feeling went away, and I worked up enough courage to leave the bathroom, I jumped on our bed and said a little prayer. Even though I was terrified and confused because I've never experienced such an evil presence like that before. I was curious, I guess you could say. I know, very stupid. Anyone else would have said, "Forget this." Well, stupid me attempted to say the next name on the list, but this time, in my head. Again, a dark, threatening presence filled the room overall, but not as intense and not so close to me or in my personal space, leaving residual energy on my body, but it was enough for me to go, "I give up." My husband, not too long after that, came to me and said he mentioned that demonology had been a serious interest of his. He decided to delve deeper into trying to communicate with them, and he said one in particular's name out loud. He explained that saying the name is giving him power. If you say the demon's name out loud, because it is basically inviting it into your life, your world, and even your soul, with the freedom to stalk and torment you. He recalled the feeling of constantly being stalked and paranoid, witnessing strange occurrences, even among those close to him. He ended up requesting help from members of a deity and was eventually free from it all. I had never heard of the saying, "Never speak the demon's name out loud," but it makes perfect sense. I owe a lot of what prevented it from happening to lack of good pronunciation skills, and the feeling that I felt in a short amount of time still creeps me out to this day.